Good afternoon, and thank you for taking a moment away from the World Cup and everything else you're up to today. I'm Dennis Markatos-Soriano, Executive Director of the East Coast Greenway Alliance, and our organization is honored to work with all of you to complete our 3,000-mile route for safe biking, walking, and running, Maine to Florida. We're so happy that today we have participants all the way from Maine to Florida and beyond. And by developing the most popular park in America this next decade, we're making our 450 communities healthier, happier, and more sustainable. We initiated the Build the Greenway campaign because this year is a historic opportunity to move our project forward. Available funds are triple last year's level, and next year the funding stream is likely to be cut significantly. I'm happy to see that you agree. Again, this is our most popular webinar ever, and we're working in a dedicated way with you, local, state, and regional partners to get this leading national public infrastructure project done, a route that will be both transformational and that brings sustainable economic development throughout our corridor, especially to our rural areas. I'm delighted that we have experts in the field presenting on the build opportunity so that you have the tools you need for a successful application. Such funding opportunities are typically low probability, but they have a high potential return, as we've seen in Philadelphia and elsewhere. My thinking is that the more applications we send showing overwhelming interest for a completed East Coast Greenway, the more likely our projects will be chosen for funding. Since we only have 4.5 weeks more to submit, let's get to it. Our speakers this afternoon will be East Coast Greenway Advisory Board Chair Chuck Flink of Greenways Inc., who led a major Tiger Greenway project in Northwest Arkansas, and also Trustee and North Carolina State Committee Chair Iona Thomas of McAdams, who's leading the build charge in North Carolina, followed by Advisory Board member Jeff Olson, who leads the Empire State Trails development in New York, and our Deputy Director, Niles Barnes. We have over 20 minutes slated for Q&A, so please type your questions for us throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best to give you the information you need. Thank you for your commitment to the Greenway and Greenways all across the country. I'll now hand it over to our Deputy Director, Niles Barnes, for some background information on Build.
Good afternoon. Glad so many folks are able to join us today. And as a reminder, we have a lot of information hosted over at greenway.org/build, and we will be posting a recording of this webinar at that webpage. I want to quickly highlight a few resources included during this webinar. You can download the 4 handouts listed here on this screen through the webinar control panel. These are also on our website. 2 resources are from USDOT. One is a helpful guidance document for completing the benefit cost analysis section of a build application, and the other is the original Federal Register announcement document that provides a really good overview on eligibility, project types, timelines, and other helpful information. We also have 2 examples of past successful applications, a construction application and a planning focused application. So you can look in that control panel to download these handouts. And as a reminder, the Department of Transportation has provided links to earlier webinar series and slides that they have hosted related to Build. And after we hear from our panelists, we will share a bit more related to the additional resources the East Coast Greenway Alliance is planning to provide, and then open it for discussion. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Chuck Flink.
Niles, thank you so much, and welcome everyone this afternoon. As Dennis pointed out, I was involved in actually running a Tiger II grant application. Jeff Olson and I were part of a team that applied for a $22 million Tiger II grant, and we were awarded $15 million, and that was for the Razorback Greenway in Northwest Arkansas. Our client team consisted of the Northwest Arkansas Regional Planning Commission, which was the MPO, and the Walton Family Foundation. One of the things that struck me about the recent Build announcement is how similar it is in a lot of ways to the Tiger program. And that was one of the reasons that that Alta furnished 2 applications for download today that were actually awarded, the construction application and the planning application. There are, however, some differences, and I thought I would just take the time that I have here to cover a few key points about build as it's related to the applications. First, as with Tiger, this is about creating jobs, but unlike Tiger, it really has got to focus on boosting rural economies. So one of the things you'll want to really think about is how your program or how your application is oriented in this manner. You want to be sure that you address all the selection criteria and support that with facts and figures. I think the tendency for some applications is to get very wordy and to sort of write about why an applicant thinks they should be awarded the grant. But what you really want to do is to try to support everything that you can with facts and figures. And let me just run through. There's 3 major criteria in the build application. There's merit, there's project readiness, and there's a benefit cost analysis. Under the merit, the subcategories are safety, state of good repair, essentially, are you on an adopted plan? Economic competitiveness, what is your project doing to improve access to jobs and employment? Environmental protection, quality of life, how is your project increasing transportation choice? Innovation, innovative technologies, innovative project delivery, innovative financing, partnerships, and non-federal revenue sources. So be sure to address all of these criteria with facts and figures, not just flowery text or not just trying to sell your project, but demonstrate how your project's really going to make a difference. And of all those that are listed, and they're all very important, one of the things that we did with the Tiger application in Northwest Arkansas was we had a lot of letters of support. So you really should be collecting those and get them from every place you can. If you can get a letter of support from the governor's office, from your congressman, from your chambers of commerce and local business people, get as many letters of support that you can. With regards to project readiness, these are really supposed to be shovel-ready projects. So they're really expecting that you've got everything ready to go, and what the build funds are doing is providing you the necessary financing to build the project. So they judge it on technical feasibility, your schedule, required approvals, and assessment of risk and mitigation. So where you already have approvals, make sure that you include those approvals in your application, and make sure that your schedule matches the schedule that's published in the application. I think that the Tiger applications that we've downloaded are relevant, but you need to be very careful in following those to the letter of the law, because there have been changes in selection criteria from the Tiger to the build. So I just want to make a note of that. And again, this is emphasizing rural populations. You want to really look at this as a multimodal transportation addition. How are you serving underserved populations in the transportation system? How are you fostering new business? How would you support the creation of permanent jobs? How do you expect to grow the economy? And you can definitely make use of existing statistics from other projects to support your conclusions, but you need to start collecting and assembling that data now. So anything that you can do in that regard quickly will be helpful. And just a reminder that if you have not already been registered, if you don't already have the DUNS, the Data Universal Numbering System number, or you have not registered through SAM, you need to do that right away, because it's taking 2 to 4 weeks just to get registered to submit an application, and your application is going to be rejected if you have not already registered. So it's critical that you get registered and that you have your e-business point of contact as part of your registration process. So those are a couple thoughts from me. I look forward to any questions that you want to direct my way, and I'm going to turn it over to Iona Thomas.
Thanks, Chuck. So I wanted to speak just about the planning side of the equation. And Niles, if you can go to the next slide, I think. What we're trying to do here in North Carolina, we are working with our RPOs and MPOs and state committee membership to develop a strategic plan, and that is in a draft phase right now. one of the things that has come to the surface in our strategic plan is that for our rural corridors, the detailed corridor plans really are a missing link for us. We've got a great vision. We have a strong state committee and organization here in North Carolina. Our concept is well articulated, and our conceptual spine route is well articulated, and we've got good progress. North Carolina has the most connected of any of the East Coast Greenway metro regions with 74 miles of greenway on the ground. In contrast, we have very few miles of greenway on the ground on our rural corridors. And in analyzing why that is, it is because we lack detailed corridor plans that are doing the parcel by parcel analysis and developing alternatives so that we can be ready to acquire land and move forward with the kinds of investment that Chuck was talking about for a construction project. So the graphic you see here is trying to articulate that if we can get that missing link in place, then that opens us up to rural investment, both from the federal, state, and private and foundation level, and then ultimately for rural economic development. We have some good return on investment numbers here that NCDOT and ITRI and Alta have just released a study on the economic impact of shared use paths, and those are intentionally largely from rural communities, so we'll be leaning heavily on that analysis. And Niles, if you can go to the next one. We're in the process right now of nailing down which of the RPOs will be our lead sponsor, but the concept here is that we would, the planning grant for the detailed corridor studies would be entirely located in our rural communities. And so we would have 4 distinct phases of the plan, but we're talking about, one very large initiative to define how the East Coast Greenway will make its route through North Carolina. One of the things that is strongly encouraged in BUILD is, as Chuck said, the rural component of it, but also being able to bring broadband with your project. And so broadband with Greenway is a big piece of what we will be talking about in this project. There's no reason that this corridor can't be acquired for both Greenway and broadband, and so we think that's a really good fit for BUILD. So as I said, we are still in the process of nailing down who the lead sponsor is. We've got a lot of interest in this, and East Coast Greenway will be supporting it. And just to tag on to what Chuck said about the letters of support, it's important to understand that with Tiger and BUILD, that the decisions are really, once you get through the first filter of if you meet the basic criteria, the selection really becomes discretionary. So it's important to market your application both inside your state and outside of your state. Dennis and Niles have a good plan for how East Coast Greenway can help at the national level with that marketing. But this is certainly a bureaucratic exercise, but it's equally a marketing exercise. And with that, I will hand off to Jeff.
Great, thank you. And I think you're going to hear some common elements coming across these different projects. And I really just so impressed to hear more than 90 people signed up for this webinar, and so many people working together as part of the overall East Coast Greenway. And I think one of the things that I know we'll talk about at the end here is how the Greenway end-to-end helps make the individual projects stronger, how regardless of what happens to any individual application, that will end up demonstrating the need for literally hundreds of millions of dollars in funding, and that will be very helpful down the road. So it's great to see everyone working together. Go to the next slide, please. I just wanted to, I was asked by the Greenway board and staff to sort of paint the picture, the art of the possible. And Chuck started talking about the Razorback project that we worked on, which now is 9 years ago, longer ago than I think any of us want to really admit or believe. But in that period of time, that was one of the biggest projects anybody had ever heard of. Certainly one of the largest single source funded projects that we knew of at the time, upwards of $40 million, and it generated well over $100 million in economic development in its first year or two, and that continues to grow. We've seen that leapfrogged in multiple places, and it's not unusual now to see projects happening at a much larger scale. The one we're directly involved right now here in my home state of New York, the Empire State Trail was announced by our governor in the state of the state last year. Governor Cuomo announced that in January. Our legislature came forward with $200 million in state funding, single source, to build 750 miles, to connect 750 miles within the next 3 years. And some of the biggest individual sections of that are 25, 30, $40 million projects that are all happening. There's 61 different capital projects in process right now, all of them aiming to be completed by the year 2020. And while the Greenway, East Coast Greenway certainly connects to that at the southern end of the map that you see, but the really important thing here is that we're now easily able to talk about Greenway projects that are in the $100 and $200 million scale. And I do think that the East Coast Greenway is a $1 billion Greenway project. We just have yet to see one fully funded like that. So as you're looking at the sections that you're working on and the pieces in your community or your county, your state, recognizing that they're part of this much bigger, critically important national infrastructure will help lead us in that direction. Next slide, please. I think one of the key things, and I think both Chuck and Iona talked about this, is the partnership that comes together around the project that you're proposing. I think one of the weaknesses I've often seen, those of us that lean towards green and sustainable and the bike and pedestrian and trails world that we're in, these decisions are going to happen at a bigger scale, and they're going to need stakeholders and partners that operate at that level in order for this to be successful. I know that Chuck mentioned the letters of support from the Razorback Greenway. We got those in a single meeting. It took less than 5 minutes, and there were 42 levels of support of every conceivable level: corporate, public, private, philanthropic, all sitting around the table saying, yes, we'll do that, and all delivering it within a matter of days. And when you look at the kind of competition that's out there for the BUILD program, that's essentially who you're competing with, is entities that have put together that kind of partnership. So think about government, nonprofit, business, public, private, the full range of possible partners, and make them part of the process. Next, please. Really, the key to this comes down in simple terms to producing an application that focuses on shovel-ready projects. They really want to see stuff that's going to get built. That every piece that Chuck went through when he bulleted out all of the elements of the application, you have a chance to be awarded points in every one of those. And even if you might be thinking we're just building a greenway and trail, what does it have to do with that criteria? There is a way to write that carefully and to present that, because greenways and trails cut across every single one of those issues. They just haven't traditionally been presented that way. So make sure that in every single category that you look at some of the examples that are posted on the handouts, and look at how we carefully crafted those messages to make sure that you don't miss any opportunity to score a single point, because with hundreds and possibly 1,000 or more applications, that could make the difference. I urge you in the strongest possible sense to talk about mobility and transportation and being multimodal as your primary message, that this is about infrastructure. Less so that it's about walking and bicycling and trails, because if you look at how this program is framed, to some extent, we in the trails world are not in the mainstream of what this funding program was set up to do. But you could say exactly the same thing about Tiger. And in fact, I think the Razorback application and 2 or 3 others that we worked on that year got a significant percentage of the national program, because they were such good, well thought out projects. I'll skip down to development, and again, the number of times you can bring your project back to economic development and jobs. We all know that we've seen this happen. The brew pub that opens, the bed and breakfast, the farm to table restaurant, every one of those elements that happens along a greenway is a measurable element of economic development, and they do create jobs, and they are measurable. And when you look at the cost benefit of trail projects versus other heavier infrastructure, the big highway, bridge, and transit projects that we'll see, they are very, very cost effective, and particularly if you document that well. So that's just some brief tips on being successful about these. I just, again, so happy to hear so many people pursuing this, and I hope that we will see out of this an effort Greenway wide that takes our efforts to the next level. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Chuck, Iona, and Jeff, for those great perspectives and insights. Questions are coming in, so we want to get to those as quickly as we can. I did want to be sure that those attending are clear on the resources the East Coast Greenway Alliance is prepared to offer. We do have staff standing by, ready to assist entities that may be interested in pursuing a BUILD grant application. And this assistance could take the form of letters of support, even assistance reviewing and contributing to an application, data and maps, and educating leaders in DC regarding the importance of these projects. Here's a quick snapshot of our staff leaders representing the different East Coast Greenway regions from Maine to Florida. We also have national consulting leaders, including those you've heard from today, but also additional folks standing by that can be ready to assist. And just underlining the points earlier made about emphasizing and focusing applications on economic development and the potential these projects have to spur competitiveness. Also want to be sure that folks highlight the different ways the project can lead to non-motorized access to key human services and jobs. And as folks have said, applications will be made stronger if they have letters of support from senators, House members, and governors. And if these letters cannot be obtained by July 19th, still pursue them and submit them when they're available. And we just would be remiss not to acknowledge the political backdrop to this round, the discretionary nature that Iona referenced. Upcoming elections in 2018, it will include all 435 voting seats in the House of Representatives, and 35 of the 100 Senate seats will be contested. And of those, 11 of those East Coast Greenway states have elections for senator, and 10 East Coast Greenway states have elections for governor. So we hope that through this process, we ensure that all the elected officials understand the significance and multiple cascading benefits that come from investing in these bike and ped and multimodal projects. So with that, we're going to start answering participant questions that have come in.
Great. Thank you, Niles. And again, thank you to the panel. What a tremendous bevy of knowledge coming from all these great people. Thank you, Chuck, Iona, and Jeff. Really want to dive into information that you need when you're on the local level. What do you need to move this forward? And so we'll be looking into questions, but first wanted to jump into rural and the definitions of rural, making sure that we all know what that means and what kind of a priority that would mean. I just want to dive into that. So if one of the panelists or numerous panelists would be willing to jump into that, make sure that we're all clear about that and we take advantage of that opportunity.
Dennis, this is Chuck. It's defined in the Federal Register, and essentially it's not the statistical metropolitan areas. So there's a definition of it, and that definition then can be matched to mapping data that's available, by USDOT and other, locally by MPOs. So you can get a sense of where that cutoff is. And we want to stress that, this build process is emphasizing rural, but it's not discounting urban. So, I think people can apply for all kinds of applications, but there does seem to be an emphasis by this administration on awarding rural grants more so.
Excellent. Thank you, Chuck. I have one other just follow-up to brace that point. So in our last few rounds, the East Coast Greenway has really benefited from Tiger. And one of the areas where it benefited most was in Philadelphia, where the city of Philadelphia worked with stakeholders throughout the region. It was a strong coalition of local nonprofits, philanthropy, the public sector and leadership, and getting all those letters of support. And they've received over 30 million in assistance for completing East Coast Greenway segments there. So I did want to, some of that was during the Obama administration, but 12 million was last year. So even though they have been focused rural, there are opportunities in an urban context. Thank you, Chuck. Now we have another question. In my state, no Tiger Grant applications were allowed unless they came from the state DOT. Is that an unusual situation? I'm assuming that our DOT will have the same stranglehold on build grants.
Again, it's Chuck. It's unfortunate, but yes, I mean, I think that some DOTs do limit who the applicant can be. They want to coordinate. And actually, to be honest with you, in Arkansas, the DOT was not happy that the MPO and the Walton Family Foundation essentially cooperated and submitted an application, even though, as Jeff mentioned, we did have the blessings of these people. But in the end, it caused a lot of friction that throughout the life of the project, that the DOT felt like, they should have controlled all the applications, for the build. So there is a lot of competitiveness. There can be some jealousy as to, how these grants are awarded. Our recommendation is that you do have conversations within your state. And this is why you want to get your governors and your secretaries of DOT, et cetera, to submit letters of support so that there is some coordination going on. It probably will be a case-by-case, state-by-state basis.
And let me chime in here.
Go ahead. You go first. You go first.
Keep in mind that each entity is limited to 3 applications. So your DOT will be limited to 3 applications. We submitted the North Carolina detailed corridor plans to NCDOT for their selection committee, and we weren't selected to go forward. However, we do have their blessing, and in fact, if we're successful, they have offered to administer and take care of the cash flow on the project. So DOT, your DOT could conceivably be a good partner in this. The fact that they're limited to 3 should, I would think, open up other entities in your state to be able to submit.
This is Jeff. I was just going to, it's a very difficult section to handle diplomatically, but I do think we all also need to be aware of the politics of the situation. This is a discretionary program, so at some level in the administration, those decisions will be made. I would strongly suggest that people who have ties to leadership at that level and who are in districts that voted, to help get people elected, would want to find some way to strategically take advantage of that opportunity, because that has something to do with why we're seeing a tendency, I guess, towards the rural projects in this case. Just something to bear in mind. I'm not sure this is the right forum to get into a discussion of national politics, but I do think it's worth keeping in mind that will, in some way, shape, or form, have some influence on the outcome.
And a number of questions that have come in around the broadband aspect that you mentioned, Iona. Could you clarify a little bit what you mean, first of all, by broadband, and then how you're approaching connecting that to the application?
So it's under the dig once kind of concept, so that we would examine any of the rural corridors in North Carolina for both greenway easements and broadband fiber access through the corridor. We're not envisioning actually negotiating or talking with specific providers, but more on that dig once. So we would set the project up, and again, this is in a planning study, but set the project up so that you have an easy way to run a broadband fiber connection through this corridor. Now, it's interesting to see how Wi-Fi plays into that. but basically it's that dig once concept.
Great. Thank you, Iona. Now we have a number of questions about design. And so we've talked about how planning will receive around 1% or a cap of 1% of the funding overall. And is it okay for design money to be included with a construction application? Is a great question from Heather.
This is Chuck again. We included it in our Tiger application. All of our design, which is called PS&E, Plans, Specifications, and Engineering, PS&E. All of that was included. The money for finalizing the right-of-way acquisition was included. So all of this money to essentially execute the project was included in the construction application, and it was fully funded with of course the corresponding match, which was an 80-20 cost share program for the Razorback.
This is Jeff. I would just add to that anytime you use federal money, it does come with some strings attached, and Chuck probably as much as anybody in the country can talk to you about those strings at great length. So if you do have a resource where you can get your soft costs, if you will, your planning and environmental permitting and design work, even your land acquisition work, done up front and paid for outside of the federal aid program, chances are you'll find it much easier to do, and the process is easier. So I think that goes along. The corollary to that is if you're going to ask for federal money, ask for a lot of it, because these projects are a significant task to manage. So if you're going after something small, you're better off looking at a different source. This is multi-million-dollar money, and really tens of millions more likely to make it worth going through all that process in some way. And then the other thing I just wanted to add to that goes back to the rural conversation, is that the projects, the Greenway sections that we're talking about, will have so much bigger a linear impact on a rural area than most transportation infrastructure projects do, because it's rare that in a rural context a project that long that cuts through that and connects through that many communities and could potentially bring broadband or other services. So the significance of that is very important to identify if you are in a rural area. The converse in urban areas, and Philadelphia is a great example, those sections of the East Coast Greenway tend to be complementary pieces of a regional system that's coming together, as opposed to more often in that rural area, it's a new defining element of that rural region.
Yeah, great points, Jeff. And I want everyone to know that you can reach out to the East Coast Greenway Alliance anytime if you need information about the East Coast Greenway. We want to provide that information for you that's helpful for the application. For instance, we have over 10 million visits per year on the East Coast Greenway. That's today. And our plan is to grow it so that we're the most popular park in America. Talk about economic potential, economic development in rural areas. We want to have 100 million visits per year. And so that will generate a great deal of positive economic impact. So I want to provide you anything that you want that can help you with your application to be as strong as possible. Now, jumping into another question, there's a more political question from Sarah, and this has to do with her state DOT has been resistant to submitting a build grant because of the political situation where she doesn't feel like the administration would favor her state. And as a partial answer to that, I have noticed some of that, where some preference for certain states where they had won an election. So I wanted to just hear from panelists what you think of going through the process, even if there's a low probability.
This is Chuck. I'll start it off. I think it's always a good practice to apply for these grant applications irrespective of the politics. I think it shows that your states have viable projects and that you're looking to get cost share in your state, and I think that's a prudent policy to always pursue these if you have projects. The politics are always going to fluctuate over the life of these federal programs. And, I just encourage people not to get too wrapped up in the politics of the day. When these programs become available, I strongly encourage you to put an application in, even if you really believe that you have low probability. I can tell you that when we put the Tiger application in from Northwest Arkansas, we weren't sure. We really did not know that this was a program that had no history really of funding greenways. And so it was a real pleasant surprise for everyone. And we didn't really give it a very high probability when we went after it, but we landed it. And so I just encourage you to go through the exercise. And the other thing is, it may identify, as you go through this exercise for build, you may then set yourself up for other programs that you could use all the materials that you've put together for build to pursue other federal grants or even philanthropic grants. So I would encourage you to do it.
Yeah, I'll just follow that. This is Jeff. And I think just have your eyes open. I think everybody sees what's going on politically. Be aware that there may be places within states that don't necessarily follow the same trend as the state as a whole. It's a good thing to know. And bear in mind that in some cases, decisions are made looking backwards politically. Somebody might say they're only going to get funding because they voted for this particular result. But it may be the other way around, that they're trying to score some points the next time and show that politically they want to win those votes back. So it's a very tough calculation to have to make. But I think, Chuck, you're right on that. This is a chance to demonstrate for the Greenway as a whole that we have a chance at growing that 100 million person a year visitation, that those people are customers for these communities. And I don't want to discount the reality that writing an application like this is a significant amount of work. These are not, it's not a weekend project. But if you do have the resources to put it together and assemble a team that rallies around it, that will have benefits of its own, and there will be a next opportunity. I think if there's one thing I can say I've learned in working in this field, is that the money always seems to find the good projects, and often it's a funding source that we don't even know exists right now becomes available a couple of years from now. Tiger is a great example, now known as Build. So position yourselves well, not just for this round, for as Chuck said, for what will come in the future.
Question that's come in around potential resources or places folks could go to locate needed data. So I was wondering if you all had any recommendations for places to go to get economic data, safety data that might make their application more competitive.
Jeff, do you want to lead that one?
Yeah, sure. A lot of what we use comes directly from traffic safety data. Every state has a database. There's a federal database as well. You'll find economic data from various federal agencies. The census puts out fantastic population and demographic data. That information, if you've got a good grant writer, some good planners in your area that do this kind of work, is pretty much readily at their fingertips. I think the real trick, though, is as close as you possibly can make that data that's about the project, as specific about the project as possible, and look at data that's coming from your metropolitan planning organization. For example, if you're in an urban area, there are various rural supportive planning entities that exist, and so I wouldn't want to be starting that process from scratch in this case if I'd never done it before. But there's actually quite a bit of expertise out there. And in fact, if you look at some of the federal USDOT webinars on the BUILD program, they do offer some suggestions on locating that data.
Iona, how are you guys approaching the RPOs in North Carolina?
Well, we are, to be honest, a bit behind the eight ball because we're trying to nail down our lead sponsor. So once we get that underway, I think we will be relying on some of the work that ITRI and Alta have done, certainly on the economic impact. and just trying to go from there. Our state committee is comprised of RPOs and MPOs. So as Jeff said, the folks that we're working with are largely planners and well steeped in all of this kind of data. So we're hoping once we get kind of our legs under us and get moving on it, we can tap into that. We also have a good RPO alliance here. Dana Stuczinski is the lead of that, and so I think she'll be a real asset for us as well.
Great.
And we're going to be relying on you, Chuck.
Indeed. I have a quick question, actually, maybe not quick, but a question for Jeff. And this is actually from me. I really want to know more, sort of zooming down into the state level for a brief time. How did Governor Cuomo get so inspired to jump on the Empire State Trail? And how do you think we, all of us, in the East Coast Greenway corridor, can best bring such inspiration to the other 14 governors in our corridor?
Well, talk about a $64 million question. I think it's a very parallel story that I hope, in fact, Governor Cuomo would be willing to help the other governors with, and our national leadership as well. If you look at the 750 miles of the Empire State Trail, there are sections along the Erie Canal or in the Hudson Valley that have been worked on, some of them for decades, but there'd never really been that single project to tie it all together. And that's, the governor's vision to make that all happen at once, as opposed to, continuing to apply to, federal TAP grants or build or using other state sources and doing it piece by piece. And I think that's really where I see this effort with the Greenway reaching a similar level. We have a very clear depiction of what's on the ground. We can see where the vast majority of the gaps are fairly well known, and folks like Iona are working on closing the parts that we don't know for sure yet. The more we're able to make that visible to people, that they realize that if we just had this next X number of dollars, we could make this much of it happen. And I think that's really the point that East Coast Greenway is very rapidly getting to, where we know what the missing pieces are, we know what they cost, we have a way of clearly demonstrating their benefit. They become popular enough that there's support all the way, from public, private, nonprofit partners to want to make it happen. That will reach some, I know it's sort of a catchphrase, but some tipping point where it's clear that this is the right thing to do, and that people who are more powerful than us completely believe that and are willing to take that big step, because New York State's a good example. Funding a single line item out of our legislature for $200 million was a significant effort, and to have the governor lead that and make that happen is extraordinary. I hope we'll see a similar thing happen for the East Coast Greenway.
Dennis, there's some other questions in here that I think I'd like to lump together in a single answer. And that is regarding anything that's existing that's part of your program. There was a question about if we already have right-of-way, is that a good leverage? There was questions about what about the running the project and expenses and things that are associated with it. What I would say on these kinds of applications is tell your story as completely and accurately as you can, and anything that you think that is done, that is accomplished as part of your project. If you've already done public engagement, if you already have some permits in hand, if you have purchased right-of-way, if you have planning work completed, if you have design and construction drawings somewhat completed, anything that is associated with your project that you feel is in a position of either in process or completed, be sure to list this as part of your project and in your project description. Someone asked if there was any part of the merit criteria that should be emphasized over any other. I think if you'll look at the Razorback Greenway, you'll find that there's a lot of balance in responding with data on all of the sub-criteria under merit, sort of with equal amount of emphasis. So we tried to provide a very balanced application and therefore a very thorough look at the project and how it was going to be carried out. So I don't really think there's anything that was overemphasized, over another. But one new category under build, you'll notice, is innovation, and it's actually split into 4 different ways. It's not just innovation, but it's technology, delivery, and financing. That's kind of a new twist. So clearly there's some emphasis on how innovative, how creative, how out of the box is your project going to be in terms of making an application for these funds. So that's taking about 4, maybe 6 questions and trying to provide a blanket answer for all of those.
Excellent. Thank you, Chuck. One more question, sort of in that same category, is around projects that might be currently underway in a particular state or region that aren't going to be necessarily part of a build project application. Best approach to sort of citing those, using those estimates of the construction value, and then using some of that data to help build out the cost benefit analysis. Could you talk a little bit, anyone, about how you might have approached that or used numbers from other projects?
Well, you definitely want to use, the current construction values. So I think if you have projects that are underway in other parts of your state that are similar to what you're building, those are going to provide you the most accurate construction values. And I can just tell you that those values over the course of the last 10 years have varied tremendously from recessionary values that were coming out of 07, 08, 09 into 10 and 11 to current really hot market values where construction costs, the cost of materials, really we're seeing record numbers. So the closer that you can get a project, cost to something that has been done recently, say the last 6 months to a year, those are going to be much, much better numbers to use in terms of generating what you think your costs are going to be. And then of course, we always put an escalator in there, a 10, 20, 15, 20%. I would probably not recommend anything less than a 20% sort of buffer or contingency on your numbers, so that you're essentially trying to inflate your numbers to account for when funds would be awarded and when they would be spent.
Let me just add on to that too, that there's the rural factor. If you are doing a construction project in a rural community where you don't have a lot of contractors or competition, that you may need to be even more conservative with those numbers. So just tuck that away as well.
Excellent. Well, that was a great wrap of many of the questions, and I'd love to hear from our panelists. Do you have any final statements, final thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Well, I'll kick it off. I mean, I think this is a really great opportunity for the East Coast Greenway Alliance and for all the projects that are part of the Greenway in all states. And it just echoes what Jeff said earlier in that regard. And I think it's going to be a very good exercise for you to go through in your community to really put a complete application together. And whether or not you're successful with this program, we have really seen where people do make these efforts, that they are able to advance their projects. Whether they get awarded a build grant or not, they're able to advance their projects in other ways. So I would just strongly encourage you to go through the application process and generate the best application you can. And good luck.
I'll just weigh in and say thanks, I think, to Dennis and Niles for organizing this for us to come together as a community. The more applications that we submit, the louder our voices as East Coast Greenway cities and towns will be. So it is a time for us to all pull together. And I do think Chuck is absolutely right that you will use this information. It will be ready at your fingertips when the next opportunity comes, and the lift to jump on that opportunity will be a little lighter.
Well, excellent. Thank you, Iona and Chuck and Jeff. This webinar was just an example of how strong the East Coast Greenway team is getting. It's just remarkable. Not only is our staff growing, but we have outstanding partners like you based in the private sector, along with everyone on this call in the private, public sector, and also as volunteers from the community, making this East Coast Greenway happen and other greenways and trails happen across the country. So congratulations on everything you're doing. Our communities need us to accelerate our work, and let's see if we can make the build opportunity one of those levers that we utilize to do just that. In terms of next steps and feedback, we would love to hear from you continuously. Let's stay in touch. build@greenway.org is our email address for this campaign. And please do be in touch with the regional coordinator that works with your state. We'd love to hear from you. We want to coordinate with you to do what we can to get these funds toward great projects. So we want to be more of a resource for all of you in these next 4.5 weeks that we have before we need to submit all the applications. And then in DC over the next several months as we share the portfolio of East Coast Greenway projects with key stakeholders at USDOT and in Congress. So let's make the most of this opportunity. Thank you to everyone involved in this webinar and everyone who's getting the East Coast Greenway done. We appreciate everything you do. Thank you.